There are no followers, so let me go and redirect you from the other page to here. How do I do it? Copy. Okay. Two watching live now. Okay, I've got some people, but I need to get over to here. Yep, I got it. Got it. Over to the other live. Okay, let's see if this works. 52 waiting. Okay, great, thank you. Now I just need to wait for people to shift over from the other feed. I don't know what has happened on the other side. And 25 over here. Sort of moving from one to the other. Now, I think I'll just take a minute to tweet this new link because people are coming on from Twitter. I'll just say, this is the live feed that is okay, I've corrected it on Twitter. I've got 36 people on this feed. Can see you, good evening, working. All right, good. Shashank. I'll get that. All right, I see all of you here in the live chat. And I think I've still got 15 people on the wrong side. But let's go ahead and start. Those 15 people shift over to the other feed. Just send it a few more times. Over to the feed. Okay, I think that should be it. I'll probably just go ahead and shut this page. Maybe I'll leave it on in case someone asks where we are. Good evening, it's working. Good evening. All right. Okay, good. So I've got 46 people here. I have a live chat, and as you can see, I just have my bedroom. So I apologize for the low quality of studio production here. And I'm glad to have you. So I'm just going to go ahead and get into a couple of things. I need to speak to the administration at NALSAR to find out about whether we are going to, oh, I have my coffee. Getting cold while I'm trying to make the feed work. I'm going to have to speak to the administration to find out if we're going to do the rest of the class schedule as per what was posted. So some of you have already pointed out that today was supposed to begin, I believe, at 4:20, something like that. And instead we're starting at 5:30, finishing by 7. And let me just ask you, I see on Twitter that some of you have been retweeting the live stream. If it's possible for you to tweet to this feed, people don't accidentally go to the other one. I still have, I'm still showing that 12 people are waiting on the feed that is not working, but I don't think there are many more ways to inform them other than if you tweeted about the YouTube channel, then just retweet with this correct feed. So here's what we're going to do. Oh, before I begin, a little more bad news. I'm sorry I couldn't come to see you all at on campus. I've met many of you before. It was a great experience being with you at NALSAR, and I was really looking forward to coming a second time. Obviously, a one-credit course like ours is one of the least relevant casualties to what is going on globally right now with the pandemic. But it's nice that we can, I was going to say easily connect like this. It wasn't too easy to get here, and we're still on the wrong side. But it's great that we can proceed with the course like this. Now, any of you who have taken classes with me know that my classes are generally interactive. I like to hear from you. I personally went to law school in the United States and in Europe, where the so-called Socratic method is used, which means that I have been trained not only in law, but also in political science and philosophy to ask questions of the people who are attending the course so that we can have discussions and deliberations. Now, that's going to be very difficult other than through this chat. And I think every once in a while, I'll probably take a couple of minutes to reply. Probably tell, since the entirety of my room is in view, I can see the monitor and what you are typing into the chat room very easily. All right, as I was saying, there was another piece of bad news, which was that I had ordered from Penguin, the publisher of this book, a number of copies of Ambedkar's Preamble to bring to you, so you wouldn't have to be, you wouldn't have to pay anything. The author gets a pretty sizable discount. It wasn't costing me very much to bring books for you. I have been unable to come to Hyderabad, which means I have a box full of books here, and I cannot get them to you. And if my publisher would be, as you know, quite annoyed, and they would certainly never publish any. So I'm trying to think of what is the best thing to do. Another unfortunate thing that happened is that just today, Amazon.in raised the price of the book. So it had been selling at a 30% discount online. Just see what it is right now. And today, of all days, I just noticed that they increased the price back to the original price is $599, and it was selling at around $415, $419. That's 30% discount, and now it is back up, I think, to 500 rupees. So I can't even really ask you to buy the book, because that would mean that you're spending 500 additional rupees, which I wouldn't want. I think is send you some readings that are fairly easily accessible online. Now, what that would be readings like the Constituent Assembly debates, certain parts, and as you know, those are all freely available online. And well, they've raised, so I'm on Amazon, they've raised the price to 514 rupees, which is very sad. I don't know why today of all days they would, and I'm really sorry about that, because I could have brought you free books, and there's really nothing I can do to send them to you at this point. So instead of giving you this book, and definitely, I mean, if you have plenty of money, then you can buy it off of Amazon, but that's certainly not expected. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a link to certain events, certain days that are covered in the Constituent Assembly debates. We know 4th November, 25th November, that are extremely significant. So maybe have you read up on what was going on in this period, and I'll send some links of what is available online. Now, the question is how to get this to all of you, because I suppose I could put it inside of the chat box. I suppose I could upload it onto the YouTube channel, but as any of you have seen in the first 15 minutes, I'm not great at using YouTube Live. So you can put it on our Google group. Okay, Utkarsh, just send me the link to your Google group, please. One of you can email me the Google group, and I'm going to upload readings for you. Yes, you can reply to the mail you sent earlier. Okay, so that worked. I didn't expect, since I'm not in the Google groups, that I would be able to email those Google groups. So what I'll do, it seems Pratik is telling me that it is that you received my earlier email. So I'm going to send you readings tonight after we get done here that can substitute for getting this this book. If you have this book, things would be more direct. I'm going to give you readings from the Constituent Assembly and from maybe something from Upendra Bakshi and Didi Basu. One or two readings like this about the preamble and the drafting of the preamble. But the main point, which I want to, in some ways, illustrate, is how there are so many mistakes in our historic representation of the process of the drafting of the preamble. So what I want to teach you in this one credit course is, in some ways, the history of the drafting of the preamble, why it was drafted, how it was drafted, who drafted it with specifics, and to what end. And I want to do this in a way that completely subverts what we are generally taught. Now, obviously, since this is a live chat, we are all online. So I want to begin. I was kind of waiting for it to hit 6 o'clock before I got into this. 2 minutes left, but I think I'm more or less done with preliminaries. There are a lot more people on now than there were before, so I will repeat those preliminaries just for a minute. I'm going to send you on the Google group readings that you can read to prepare for the one credit course. I'm going to was sent out originally. According to what was sent out originally, we're supposed to begin at 4:20 today instead of 5:30. I believe we're just going to start now and complete as per what is written, but I'll confirm that on the Google. Is that everything that I had come up with? And yes, and if some of you who tweeted or notified others about the streaming page or video, I couldn't get the camera to work there for some reason, so I just created a new live feed over here and asked everybody to switch. And then I'll send that link on Google. All right, so we're going to get everything sorted out and send it to you on Google, and I apologize for my lack of technological skill with working with YouTube. I got it, 6 o'clock, so let's begin. You're all online, so one thing I want you to do is Google who wrote the preamble of the, so let's begin. You're all online, so one thing I want you to do is Google who wrote the preamble of the Constitution of India. Constitution of India. Let me see some answers that you get. Simple question, who wrote the preamble to the Constitution of India? In fact, the question is so simple that as law students, one of the premier universities in the country, you should be able just to tell me the answer right away without looking it up. Can you? Let me see in the chat. Who wrote the preamble to the Constitution of India? Google extracts from Wiki, Nehru. So that's the Wikipedia page. Samir, Wikibook says Nehru based on objectives resolution. Shweta, Nehru. So what do you think? Abhishek, Samir, Shweta, Fishti? Cover account, GG. Now that's a mystery to me. I don't know what that means. Bharti says Nehru, Samir. B.N. Rao, wonderful. Okay, so here we've got a B.N. Rao. Finally. NALSAR students. Google, so our access to the world of information. And I can assume, I think pretty safely, that you're all very intelligent people. So we're not dealing with the sort of lumpen masses who might have. Some of you might be future judges. Many of you will be future lawyers. Now, I suppose you've heard about legislative intent. Is this something you've learned in constitutional law or in legal process drafting? Legislative intent, let's say that a statute, a law, is ambiguous. What are the procedures available to an interpreter of that statute? Well, there are several. Some can be interpretation, constitutional interpretation, or just plain legislative interpretation. But what you know is, or what I assume you know, is that one of the main and most appealed to methods in constitutional courts is to look at intent, legislative intent. What was in the mind of the drafter of this legislation when she or he or they drafted this legislation? Because, as you know, we don't create laws for our amusement. We create legislation to address particular problems, a set of problems, or to correct defects of previous legislation because of new problems that have arisen. So when we draft legislation, we do it in order to address some sort of problem. And that intention, what was the problem? How did the drafters of the legislation understand the problem? And what was, Samira can't hear anything. Can other people hear? Video has been buffering for some time for us. The last 2 minutes, we've missed everything you've said in that time. Oh, wait a minute. I also don't see refresh the page and it comes back to the latest point. So the video has been buffering. Same here. So, can you advise me what you want me to do at this point? It's one or individual internet connection speed. Is it the part we missed later? The video stays up. And when you say very bad internet connection, are you suggesting it's my internet connection that's bad? All right, here's what I'm going to do until while you resolve this. The administrator says that this is all going to stay up, and you can go back and watch again the part that you missed. I suppose there is a time stamp. Everyone put it on 144p, works a lot better. I don't know if that's something I can do. You think okay, just I'll keep going for a few minutes. If there's an insurrection, then I'll keep going for a few minutes. If there's an insurrection, then I'll try to address it a second time. Maite is saying this is going to stop, and 144p works very well. All right, what I was saying was actually quite simple, even though I was presenting it to you in an overcomplicated way. I don't know how many of you are have taken jurisprudence classes and constitutional law classes. I suppose many or most of you have. Very simple idea of legislative intent. If I've now received around 20 to 25 answers from judges with access to the internet, the quality of access is under question right now, but nevertheless, people with access to the internet. And each of you, with one exception, has given the wrong answer. Google has given the wrong answer. Wikipedia has given the wrong answer. Quora has given the wrong answer. The UPSC, civil service, what do you call those? Training Institute has given the wrong answer. What a number of educated lawyers are saying right now at 6 p.m. is that they either do not know who wrote the preamble to the Indian Constitution, or that they have no way of accessing it, because everything they have access to, and don't worry, things don't get any better with Basu and Bakshi and other quite standard and otherwise very good sources regarding Constitution and the Constituent Assembly. There is widespread misinformation about the draft. Cover Account has asked me to put the live stream on my other device, so you'll see what you're talking about, but I'm able to see it runs there according to the side on the sidebar. So what do we make of this? If you don't know who drafted the legislation, you have no idea what legislative intent is. You can understand that. If legislative intent is to get into the mind of the legislator and understand the problem that was being addressed and what the draftsperson, what techniques and ideas and concepts and terms were used to address that problem, then legislative intent is inaccessible for those people who do not understand who drafted the legislation. And this is no ordinary piece of legislation. This is the preamble to the Constitution of India. All of you will, oh no, now we're getting buffering and lagging at 144 as well. This much is closed. This much of the issue is should be available to you to understand. I asked you to tell me who drafted the preamble to the Constitution. either what you know, or what you've been told, and each of you have, or many of you, searched online to see what Wikipedia, Quora, and other sites say, and these give you the wrong answer. Now, it seems pretty silly for me to tell you that every site on the internet and every major commentator on the Constitution, from Basu to Buxley and way beyond, have given us historically inaccurate information. And the problem of inaccessibility. Now, Utkarsh has raised the point that legislative intent should be construed as how the assembly saw it while passing it, rather than one person who framed it. That's not a bad way of thinking about it. The question that necessarily arises is, the assembly knew who framed it, and how is it possible that the assembly knew who framed it, and we don't? So the mystery gets pushed one step further if we want to talk about the intent being accessible through understanding the sort of collective mind of the assembly as a whole. We still have a piece of silence, of mystery, and if we are to understand the nature of the problems being addressed through the legislation, that black box has to be opened and the information accessed. So what I want to do in the short course is not so much talk about why we don't know, or even why we should know. I think why we should know is pretty apparent. If you want a concrete example of how not knowing has made the Supreme Court of India make claims about the nature of the preamble that are historically inaccurate, we'll talk about that a few days from now. And I won't tell you when I'm going to talk about it, because I don't want to get in trouble for blaming the Supreme Court for not knowing who wrote the preamble. But I'll give you a concrete example of how judicial decision-making can go awry because of an inaccessibility to the nature of the thought processes behind the concepts. But it's not so much these issues that we don't know large scale who wrote it, that we're misinformed about who wrote it, and that this misinformation leads to improper decisions being passed down. What I want to do instead is to talk about who did write it, when it was written, why it was written, and they are concepts that have reemerged in contemporary discourse and debates and protests in a manner that is extremely, let's say, viscerally. There are people going to jail for their opinions or their dedication or their performance with the preamble and protests. And there are people who are dedicating their lives to attempts to force the state to live up to the standards that are articulated in the preamble. And it's no longer of merely academic interest what the concepts of the preamble were supposed to mean and how we should come up and interpret or reinterpret them for today. It's of a very concrete, real political and social interest today. So what I think I hope to have till now convinced you of is that there's great misinformation about the authorship of the preamble, which means necessarily that there is going to be a lack of information on the nature of the concepts and how they were originally deployed, the problems they were originally deployed to address, and that between misinformation and disinformation. That this can be used today either a nation, or it can be used to in some way, let's say, discount or undermine some of the principles that the preamble stands for. So, or if we want to misrepresent who wrote them and why, then it's built into that preamble. Now to the first part, then. It's to the first part, then. It's slightly technical, but not nowhere nearly as technical as what you're used to learning as students, and this is the basically academic understanding of a preamble as such. So when the Constituent Assembly appointed and then elected the drafting committee and tasked them with drafting the decisions of the Assembly on the basis of the draft constitution prepared by the advisor, B.N. Rao. One of you had mentioned B.N. Rao, or two of you had mentioned B.N. Rao's name as the author of the preamble. So there's not only the misconception that it is Nehru, but also the equally erroneous belief that it was B.N. Rao. B.N. Rao was tasked with drafting a preamble that the drafting committee would then work on, edit, revise, add to, in accordance with the decisions of the Constituent Assembly. When this process was undertaken, it was more or less taken for granted that the Constitution would not be written out of there with completely innovative ideas. There was an understanding, not really British India would be in some ways, in many ways, incorporated into the new constitution, but also that there was a wide variety of other constitutions to use as resources for, let's say, freedoms or rights or useful terms that that could be taken by any of either the members of the Constituent Assembly who are proposing revisions, or the advisor, B.N. Rao, who was drafting based on looking and studying the constitutions of other countries, or by the drafting committee itself. Now, why I bring this up is because in the process of drafting a preamble, then, what was looked at were the existing preambles around the world, especially of democracies, in this era. Now, we will much later discuss, but one way for you to understand the importance of the language of preambles contemporary to the drafting of the preamble to the Indian Constitution is to realize that in this decade, or in fact in the early 20th century, there were no democracies that used the term secular in their preamble. So I don't want this to turn into a political or a communal conversation, but constitutional democracies around the world was so important to the drafters of the Constitution and to the preamble to the Constitution. The absence of certain terms in these other constitutions around the world, these other preambles around the world, also in some way affected the choices that were being made by the drafting committee. So it's not only what could be found in other preambles, but what was not there in other preambles. Any of you who studies comparative constitutional law knows that Ataturk had created two constitutions in the 20s, and in the second one, he had scratched out the idea that that Turkey would be an Islamic country, and introduced the idea of secularism there. But that was in the first article; it was not in the preamble to the Constitution. So, when the drafting committee was looking to draft the preamble, or when Bien Rao was looking to create his preamble, he was looking around the world at other preambles that were there, and in that period, terms like secularism were not used. And consequently, when our preamble was first drafted, the idea of writing secularism in would have been and consequently, when our preamble was first drafted, the idea of writing secularism in would have been a complete innovation available in democratic preambles around the world. I'm not trying to harp on this in any way. I'm just trying to show the way that drafting of our constitution and preamble, and the way that both the presence and the absence of terms has an impact in the way that our preamble, not only our constitution, but our preamble gets drafted. So now to the technical part. Every preamble has a basic structure. I don't want to use this term basic structure as in basic structure doctrine. It has a basic structure as in it has a, the word I use in my book on the preamble is an anatomy. And that anatomy means that you will find basic parts, different, or let me say, has the same basket of parts to choose from. And these are fairly important because what you will find in debates about our preamble is that people don't have a proper understanding of the different anatomical parts of any preamble, and consequently our preamble. And this is significant for this short course because I want you to understand the nature of different parts of the preamble. So it would be quite superfluous for me to read the preamble to you. I'm sure you've all got it memorized. But if I can just point out that what we have in these separated paragraphs are the potential for differentiating the parts of the preamble. So is anyone familiar with the different parts of a preamble? Because it's not only a preamble to the Constitution that has these parts, but also a preamble to any act. Now I'm waking you up in the chat if any of you know this. So either you're shy, or you can't hear me, or you've never had such a course. So in the process of drafting preambles, the preambles more or less state the source of sovereignty. So in other words, the source of power, the source of authority. Yes, 3 parts. The source of authority in the creation of that act. There can be an invocation of that sovereignty, or it can be attributed to the authority of the people, or the parliament, or the committee, whoever it is. And then, of course, you have objectives. I had mentioned that in legislation, there is an objective behind why these words are written. We don't do things just for fun. We do things like legislative drafting in order to address particular problems. Here we are: declaratory, descriptive, invocatory, and then we need another part in there. You've almost got it. So the declaratory part is making a declaration. Descriptive part, it's describing the nature of how we're going to reach the objectives. So the part that you're missing there is the objectives part, and the invocatory part, invoking some sort of power that gives us, that's a source of sovereignty, that's a source of allowing us to take a step of making that legislation, or constitution in this case. So you're not going to write in, I was waiting for you to write. So you're not going to write in, I was waiting for you to write in objectives. You're not going to do that. The reason that this term objectives is very significant is when I had asked you, does anyone know who wrote the preamble to the Constitution of India? About 10 of you, when using taking Nehru's name, had mentioned the objectives resolution. The objectives resolution is a resolution on the aims and objectives of the Constitution, the Constituent Assembly. So this resolution on the aims and objectives, since it's an objectives resolution, is supposed to translate into the objectives behind the Constitution itself. And a preamble has as one of its essential components, its anatomical parts, its objectives part. So the objectives of the Constitution are set out in the preamble. And consequently, we believe that since Nehru had authored the objectives resolution, by the way, I'm going to show you a bit later that he didn't even author that, but that's a side note. Since we believe that Nehru had authored the objectives resolution, and we understand that a preamble has as its function to set out the objectives of the Constitution, we assume, we make the inference that the preamble should be attributed to Nehru's authorship because he is the author of the resolution on the aims and objectives behind the Constitution and the Assembly. Do you understand how these steps work together? So Nehru is believed to have drafted the objectives resolution. A preamble to legislation, to an act, or especially to a constitution, states the objectives of that legislation or constitution. And so the objectives resolution is assumed to be the objectives of the preamble, and thus Nehru is assumed to be the author of the preamble because he authored the objectives of the preamble to the Constitution. So it's a set of logical and pretty valid inferences. The problem is that objectives are only one part of a preamble. So not only do we have the objectives, we also have the descriptive part, and we have the declaratory part, and we have the invocative part. Now let's understand which is which, and they're pretty self-explanatory in what their functions are, but which parts of our preamble correspond to which parts of the anatomical parts of any and all available or existing preambles. Okay. So the declaratory part tells us who framed the document and with what mandate. So the mandate is quite significant, and this was hugely controversial. Any of you who has browsed the Constituent Assembly debates know that the mandate was one of the most contentious parts of the opening lines of the preamble. Why? Because it states, "We, the people of India." Now, just stop there for a moment. We, the people of India. How many people were on the drafting committee? How many people were in the Constituent Assembly itself. So this, we, the people of India, has a certain audacity to it when you consider that these words are penned or drafted by a very small handful of persons. So we, the people of India, is supposed to be captured by the Constituent Assembly, who delegates a smaller body to work on the drafting, who in turn delegates, as we're going to see, to just one person to write this phrase. So the Constituent Assembly, as I'm sure many of you have read in the debates, was hotly debating the accuracy or or more importantly, the inaccuracy of stating that the declaratory part, who has framed the document and with what mandate. So we, the people of India, and then you pass through the other parts of the preamble, in our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. So this part of the preamble is the declaratory part. It is one amongst several other parts of the preamble, and we can set it aside as having the function of explaining who framed the document and with what mandate. So ask yourself, who framed the document? It says in our Constituent Assembly, and with what mandate? The mandate is assumed to be by the people of India, all of the people of India in the Constituent Assembly. And this is the declaratory part, that this has legitimacy, validity, because the Constituent Assembly has legitimacy through the mandate being given by not British, not anybody else, not because they were property owners or aristocracy, not because they have some natural right to make decisions like a hereditary monarchy, but the people of India. And this is very radical, and this is very profound, and this is captured in the declaratory. Okay, so one part. Preambles also have an objective part. So the objective part sets out why the document was framed and what its goals are. So if in the declaratory part, you have who has framed it and with what mandate, in the objectives part, you have why the document is framed and what its goals are. So what is the objectives part of the original Indian preamble? You remember the we the people, right? Having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign democratic republic. Now, many of you know that this was hugely controversial also. Why the socialist and secular? So when the change was made to the preamble with the 42nd Amendment, it is not quite accurate for lawyers to say that the preamble was revised. More accurately, the objectives part of the preamble was revised. So it's one thing for common people to understand the preamble to be just a bunch of inspirational words strung together at the significance behind it, what its aspirations are, where, when, and why, to understand that the preamble has different parts and each of these parts have different functions, and the objectives part of the preamble was what was amended through the 42nd Amendment. Now, I'm not going to talk about these terms, sovereign democratic republic. In the declaratory part, I had mentioned this 26th day of November 1949. Now, most of you are lawyers, so you know what 26th of November is celebrated as. Is that right? In the chat, I hope some of you can mention why the preamble says 26th November, and we celebrate Republic Day, not as 26th November,